After 9 years of absence, the son returned to his widowed mother at the family ranch in the Arizona desert. However, upon finding the property abandoned, he followed a trail that led him to a cabin hidden in the mountains. What he witnessed completely transformed his perception of her. Share your opinion in the comments below. What city are you in while you listen to us? Press the like button and let's start the story. In September 1891, Miguel Cordero got off his horse in front of what was once his family's ranch, located about 4.8 kilometers north of Tucson. 9 years had passed since he left for California, seeking fortune in the oil fields. 9 years without writing a letter. 9 years hoping that when he returned, everything would be as he had left it. The gate door hung from a single hinge. The windows of the main house were boarded up. The corral where his father used to raise horses was deserted, with fallen posts and rusty wires dragging across the dusty ground. Miguel felt his heart tighten in his chest. He called out to his mother, though he knew no one would answer. He pushed open the front door. The inside was completely covered in dust. The furniture remained in place, but there were signs that someone had removed valuable items. His father's pendulum clock was missing, as well as the porcelain tea set his mother cherished so much. On the kitchen table, he found a pile of yellowed documents. With trembling hands, he began to read them. A notice of closure, a foreclosure on the property, dated the 1st of March, 1885. His father had died 6 months after he left in an accident at the copper mine where he occasionally worked for extra income. A roof beam had collapsed, crushing 5 men. His mother, Esperanza Cordero, was widowed at 38, burdened with debts that his father had kept secret. Those debts included loans from the territorial bank, money owed to the grocer, and back payments on land taxes. Miguel continued reading, feeling his throat tighten more and more. His mother had done everything possible to keep the ranch. She sold the horses, cows, and all the livestock. She worked sewing for wealthy families in Tucson, washing clothes and cleaning homes, but it wasn't enough. The bank, owned by a man named Clarence Burton, had foreclosed on the mortgage in 1885. "My God," Miguel murmured. "Where are you, Mother?" He searched every room for a clue. In his mother's room, he found a Bible. When he opened it, a piece of paper fell out. It was a note written in his mother's trembling handwriting. "If Miguel ever returns, let him know that I forgave him long ago. I will be where the eagle rests, in the land his grandfather loved. May God bless him." Miguel knew what place she meant. His maternal grandfather, who had died before he was born, had been an explorer in service of the U.S. Army. Following the Apache Trail, his mother had told him stories about a cabin that his grandfather built in the Rincon Mountains east of Tucson. It was such a remote site that few knew of its existence. Where the eagle rests was what his mother called that place, because his grandfather said that eagles nested on the nearby cliffs. Without delay, Miguel mounted his horse and rode east. The sun was beginning to set. Upon reaching the foothills of the Rincon, he vaguely remembered the route from his childhood. On one occasion, his mother took him to visit his grandfather's hut. The route followed a dry stream bed, then an almost imperceptible path among mesquites and saguaros, which progressively ascended towards a rockier area. At nightfall, Miguel camped out in the open, tormented by the image of his mother alone, dispossessed of everything, forced to take shelter in the mountains. He had left in search of fortune and had left her behind at her most critical moment. Remorse burned his chest like incandescent metal. With the first rays of the sun, he resumed the exploration. The landscape became more rugged, and his horse panted from the effort of climbing stony paths. Towards noon, when he had almost lost hope of finding anything, he spotted a column of smoke. It was a faint line rising among the pinon pines about 800 meters away. Miguel stopped his horse cautiously and approached slowly. Then he made out a cabin of logs and stone, modest but sturdy, built against the mountain slope. In the corral, There were 2 mules and a thin-looking cow. A small garden showed green rows of vegetables. On the porch, a woman sat mending a shirt. Miguel barely managed to say, "Mother." When he looked up, that woman was his mother, but at the same time, she was not. Esperanza Cordero was 47 years old, yet she looked younger than when he had left. Her face was weathered by the sun, with lines at the corners of her eyes. However, her expression reflected a peace that Miguel did not recognize in his memory. Her hair now had silver streaks tied in a simple braid. She wore functional work attire, a denim skirt, a faded cotton blouse, and men's boots. She stood up slowly, letting go of the shirt, and her eyes filled with tears. With a broken voice, Miguel said, "My son," then clumsily got off his horse and ran to her. They embraced on the porch as they both cried. Under his hands, Miguel felt his mother's bones. She was thinner than he remembered, but he also felt her stronger, with muscles hardened by work. "Forgive me, I'm Miguel," he said. "Forgive me, mother. I should have written to you. I should have come back." "You're here now," she murmured, stroking his hair as she did when he was little. "That's what really matters." They were like that for several minutes. Finally, Esperanza pulled away. She dried her tears with the back of her hand and said, "Come inside. You must be hungry." Miguel followed her into the hut. It was a single large room, clean and tidy, with a wood-burning stove in one corner, a table surrounded by 4 chairs, and stocked shelves. At the back, he made out 3 cots with folded blankets. Everything was simple, but cared for with affection. Esperanza served coffee and placed bread spread with honey on the table. Miguel ate while she looked at him with a mixture of joy and sorrow. "I saw the ranch," Miguel said, finally. "The foreclosure documents. I'm so sorry, mother." Esperanza nodded, her lips pressed together. Clarence Barton made sure she lost absolutely everything. Your father owed him money, but the amounts Barton showed were implausible, exaggerated. The judge was a close associate of Barton. "Of course I didn't have the chance. How did you get here?" "After losing the property, I tried to stay in Tucson, where I worked as a maid, seamstress, and laundress. However, Burton made sure that decent families wouldn't give me work. He claimed I didn't pay well, that I wasn't trustworthy, but that was false. Now, who is going to believe a Mexican widow over an Anglo-Saxon banker?" Miguel clenched his fists. He was very familiar with that injustice. "I remembered this place," Esperanza continued. "Your grandfather's hut. I arrived here 6 years ago, planning to stay only until I saved a little money. However, I found peace," and then she paused, looking at the door. Just then, Miguel heard voices from outside, youthful voices laughing. The door opened and 2 boys entered, each carrying firewood. They froze when they saw Miguel. The first was about 16, tall and slender, with dark skin and penetrating black eyes. The second was smaller, maybe 14, sturdier built, and hair black as jet. Both wore patched but clean work clothes. "Mother," said the older one in Spanish with an Apache accent. "Who is he?" Miguel felt the world spin. "Mother." Esperanza stood up quickly, stepping between Miguel and the 2 boys. "He is my son, Miguel," she declared with a firm tone. "Miguel, they are Thomas and Mateo." Tomas, the older one, was clearly Apache. His features gave it away. Prominent cheekbones, straight nose, the proud attitude of his people. Mateo looked mestizo, perhaps Mexican, with Yaqui ancestry. "Your son." Miguel finally found his voice. "Mother, I am your son." "That's right," Esperanza replied calmly. "And they are too at this moment." Tomas and Mateo looked at each other uncomfortably, placed the firewood by the stove, and backed toward the entrance like beasts ready to flee. "Stop," Esperanza commanded with innate authority. The young men stopped. "Sit down, all three of you. I'm going to tell you." They took seats around the table, Miguel across from the two boys, who watched him warily. Esperanza served more coffee and sat at the head of the table. "This started 4 years ago. I was hunting rabbits by the stream when I heard gunshots. I found Thomas hidden among the rocks with a gunshot wound in his shoulder. He was 12 years old and running away from the San Carlos reservation." Tomas bowed his head with his jaw clenched. "The soldiers were after him," Esperanza continued. "I had treated his wound, hid him in the hut. When he recovered, he wanted to leave. However, he had nowhere to go. His family had been murdered by treasure hunters. People who thought the Apaches knew the whereabouts of hidden Spanish gold. Thomas was the only one who had survived." Miguel watched the young Apache with renewed understanding. The slaughter of indigenous families out of greed was common, though few acknowledged it. "I suggested he stay," Esperanza said. "At first he slept with a knife under his pillow, distrustful of me, but little by little he understood that here he was safe. He helped me around the house, fixed up the hut, tended the animals, and became my son." Tomas looked up at Esperanza with evident devotion. "She saved my life," he murmured. "She gave me a home when I had none." And he, Miguel, pointed to Mateo. "A couple of years ago," Esperanza replied, "I went to Tucson to sell hides, and in an alley I saw several men beating a boy. They were kicking Mateo, insulting him, calling him a thief. I intervened with my rifle, and the attackers left. Mateo was bleeding with broken ribs. He touched his side without realizing it, as if that memory still caused him pain. He was an orphan," Esperanza continued. "His parents died of fever on the border when they were coming from the south. He wandered the streets, stealing food to survive. The shopkeepers despised him, treated him worse than a dog. Doña Esperanza healed me," Mateo said in a hoarse voice. "She gave me food and clothing and said I could stay if I worked hard. No one had ever shown me kindness." Miguel stared at his mother in amazement, the fragile woman he remembered who sobbed when they slaughtered hens for dinner. She had saved 2 children despised by society and made them her own. "I couldn't abandon them," Esperanza said simply. "God placed them in my path for a reason. I had lost my family and my home. They had no family or roof. We needed each other." "But, mother," said Miguel, struggling to understand, "you live here isolated with 2 young men whom society sees as enemies. One is Apache, the other a street thief. He's not dangerous." Esperanza's gaze became firm as rock. "Dangerous? Do you know what is dangerous, Miguel? Individuals like Clarence Burton, who strip widows of their ranches using legal documents. Merchants who beat starving children to the brink of death, and soldiers who slaughter innocent Apache families in search of non-existent gold. That is dangerous." Miguel felt shame burning his cheeks. "These boys," continued Esperanza as she placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder and another on Mateo's, "have more honesty than many respectable men I dealt with in Tucson. They work hard, they don't steal, they don't cheat. They protect me and I protect them. We are a family." Silence reigned in the hut. Miguel listened to the wind swaying through the pines outside. Finally, he spoke calmly. "All right, mother. If they are your sons, then they are my brothers." Esperanza smiled with tears shining in her eyes, and Thomas and Mateo visibly relaxed. That afternoon, Miguel worked alongside his new brothers on the chores. Thomas showed him the traps he had set to catch rabbits, detailing in halting Spanish how to interpret animal tracks. Mateo showed him the garden he had cultivated, with evident pride in his voice as he recounted how he got the pumpkins to sprout in the rocky soil. As night fell, Esperanza prepared a rabbit stew, and they had dinner together around the table, speaking little but comfortably. Miguel watched his mother serve food to the young men with maternal affection and gently scold Mateo's table manners. He was listening just the same as Thomas recounted having seen a mountain lion by the stream. After dinner, while Esperanza washed the dishes and the young people tended to the animals, Miguel went to the porch. The sky appeared filled with stars brighter than those usually seen in urban centers. He breathed in the clean mountain air, carrying the weight of a 9-year absence. His mother emerged and stood beside him, wiping her palms on her apron. "Speak to me honestly, Miguel. Did you find what you were looking for in California?" Miguel let out a humorless laugh. "I found grueling jobs, meager wages, and the loneliness of a homeless person. I saved a bit of money, but not a fortune. Nothing that justified having left you behind." Esperanza took his hand. "I've already told you, you are forgiven. I am not worthy of your forgiveness. Forgiveness is not something you deserve, son. It is given just like love." Miguel squeezed his mother's hand. "And what do you plan to do now? Do you intend to stay here indefinitely?" "I'm not sure," Esperanza confessed. "This refuge is protected, but it is harsh. The winters are extremely harsh, the supplies are insufficient, and Thomas and Mateo need something better than this. They need schooling, opportunities for the future." Suddenly, Miguel remarked, "We could reclaim the ranch that Burton unlawfully took from you by hiring a competent lawyer. Effective lawyers require money we don't have. And besides, Burton has powerful allies. Judges, the sheriff, the territorial marshal, Esperanza, cut in. Who would pay attention to our complaints?" Miguel was about to reply when Thomas came rushing out of the barn. Breathless, Mrs. Esperanza exclaimed, "Riders are approaching. I caught sight of their torches on the lower trail." Instantly, Esperanza became alert. "How many?" "4, maybe 5. Inside, quickly." The 4 of them went into the house. Esperanza took down a Winchester rifle from the rack above the fireplace and checked that it was loaded. Miguel noticed that her hands showed no trembling. She gave instructions. "Cydric, Mateo, put out the lights. Thomas, cover the windows. Miguel, grab that double-barreled shotgun and take the rear. Mother, who are they?" "Possibly Burton's men," Esperanza replied in an icy tone. "They show up every few months intending to intimidate me into vacating this plot as well. They are convinced that my father's cabin sits on land that Burton now claims." The sound of hooves was approaching. Miguel could make out the torches through the cracks in the boards covering the windows. The riders stopped in front of the house. "Esperanza Cordero," a hoarse voice shouted. "Come out of there! You know that you are living without permission on Mr. Burton's property." Esperanza partially opened the door, staying in the shadows with her weapon ready. "This land was my father's," she replied with a firm tone. "It was never part of the ranch that Burton seized, and I have the documents to prove it." "Old documents aren't worth anything," the man scoffed. Miguel recognized the voice. "Judd Marlowe, Burton's foreman. Mr. Burton claims this land belongs to him, and you have 3 days to leave or we'll come back to throw you out. You tried that before, Marlowe, and I'm still here." The riders burst into laughter. Then another voice intervened, younger and more ruthless. "It's different now, old woman. We heard you're hiding an Apache. That's forbidden. And they say you're sheltering a Mexican thief. That's also illegal. We could take you to the marshal right now. It was Kyle Burton, Clarence's son, a young man just over 20, infamous for his cruelty toward employees and the indigenous." Esperanza cocked the rifle with a noticeable click. "You can try it, but the first one to step on my land will get shot, and I don't miss at this distance." Silence fell. The men understood it wasn't an empty warning. Esperanza Cordero, daughter of a scout, had been raised with a gun in her hands. "Not worth it tonight," Marlowe grumbled finally. "Nevertheless, we'll return, old woman, and next time we'll come with more men and the marshal." The riders left. As the torches disappeared down the slope, Esperanza closed the gate and leaned the rifle against the wall. Miguel noticed that her hands were now trembling. Courage had its price. "Does this happen often?" Miguel inquired. "Once every 2 or 3 months for the past year," Esperanza replied wearily. Burton discovered that this shack stands in the way of a larger project. He intends to acquire this entire mountainous area. He claims there's silver here, and there indeed is. Esperanza exchanged a glance with Thomas and Mateo. "Perhaps your grandfather found small veins, but he never mined them, and he loved this land too much to ruin it with mining." Miguel sensed that his mother was keeping something back. However, he didn't press. It was the first night of his return, and there would be time for questions later. Everyone went to sleep. Miguel took the fourth cot, which apparently was reserved for occasional visitors. He could hear his mother's breathing in the dim light, and Thomas and Mateo tossing nervously. That night, no one managed to get a deep sleep. At dawn, Esperanza woke them all early. "Miguel, I need you to ride to Tucson. A woman lives there, Guadalupe Reyes, who supplies me with provisions. Tell her I need more cartridges and ask if she's noticed any strange movements from Burton's men." Miguel rode off toward Tucson with his mother's list and a certain amount of money hidden in his boot. Coming down the mountain took 2 hours. In that time, the city had expanded. New buildings, more population, more bustle. He went to Guadalupe Reyes' store, located in the Mexican neighborhood. Guadalupe, a stout woman of about 50, had a sharp gaze and hardened hands. When Miguel identified himself as Esperanza's son, Guadalupe's face lit up. The son they thought lost exclaimed, "Esperanza told me about you. I thought you had died." "It would almost be deserved," confessed Miguel, ashamed. "Could you help me with these provisions?" While Guadalupe gathered the products, she whispered, "Warn your mother to be careful. Burton is plotting something big. He has hired technicians from San Francisco who are inspecting land for mining exploitation and are completely mapping the Rincon area. My mother said that there is silver in those hills." "There is not only silver," affirmed Guadalupe with an enigmatic tone. "Your grandfather found something years ago, something he kept in reserve. Esperanza knows what it is but doesn't reveal it to me. She only states that it's the reason Burton desires those lands so much." Miguel furrowed his brow. What could be so valuable? "There is something more," continued Guadalupe. "Territorial Marshal Kopp arrived yesterday in Tucson, and Burton invited him to dinner. Kopp has a reputation for leaning towards whoever pays him best. In case Burton persuades him to act against Esperanza, he could bring soldiers from the fort. I appreciate the warning." Miguel arranged the provisions on his mount and was about to leave when he noticed a commotion in the street. He looked out and saw a crowd gathered in front of Burton's bank. In the middle stood Clarence Burton himself, a gentleman of about 60, elegantly dressed with a gray mustache and a raptor's gaze. He was accompanied by his son Kyle and Marshal Kopp. "Residents of Tucson," proclaimed Burton in a loud voice, "I am proud to announce that I have obtained the mining exploitation permits for the entire eastern sector of the Rincon Mountains. Soon we will begin work that will bring well-being to our town, jobs, commercial activity, and development." The crowd cheered, and Burton continued, "However, there is a small obstacle, an intruder on land essential for our activities. I have shown tolerance, but it has a limit. Marshal Kopp has guaranteed me that this matter will be resolved within the week." Kopp nodded with feigned gravity. "The rules must be obeyed. The invaders will be evicted." Miguel felt the rage boiling in his veins. Esperanza was not an invader. That plot had been owned by her grandfather many decades before Burton arrived in Arizona. However, complaining there would be futile, so he mounted his horse and set off back to the mountain. When he arrived at the hut, he found Esperanza, Thomas, and Mateo very busy. They had turned the shelter into an improvised fortification, timbers bracing doors and windows, positions ready to open fire, and water supplies accumulated. Miguel reported that he saw Burton in the town. The marshal is approaching, probably accompanied by soldiers. Esperanza remained calm, while Thomas and Mateo waited for them. It's time to show Miguel our discovery. The three followed Esperanza behind the cabin, ascending the mountain. They traveled 1,200 seconds along a hidden path among rocks until reaching a cliff. Esperanza crouched and pushed aside the bushes, revealing a narrow fissure in the rock. "Your grandfather called this the eagle's secret," she said, while lighting an oil lamp. "Follow me." One by one, they slid through the crack, and Miguel felt the rock walls brushing his shoulders. The opening widened into a natural cavern the size of a small barn. The lamplight revealed something that left Miguel breathless. The floor of the cavern was covered with wooden crates bearing seals of the United States Army. Esperanza opened one, and inside there were bars of polished silver, each the size of a brick. "My God," whispered Miguel. "In 1873, Esperanza explained that her grandfather guided a military caravan that transported silver from the mines of Tombstone to Santa Fe. They were ambushed by bandits nearby, the soldiers died, and her grandfather survived by playing dead. The bandits planned to return for the silver, but her grandfather worked all night dragging the boxes there one by one. Then he sealed the entrance and reported that the silver had been stolen. He stole from the army," corrected Esperanza. "He saved the silver and intended to return it. But the officers who organized the transport turned out to be corrupt, allied with the bandits. If her grandfather revealed the location, those same officers would have claimed it and then lost it again. So he waited. He waited until he died, leaving me the secret." Miguel counted the crates. There were 16. "If each contains the same amount of silver, this is worth a fortune," he stated. "Enough to buy 100 ranches like the one we lost," confirmed Esperanza. "But it's also evidence of an unsolved crime. If Burton discovers this, he will use his influence to claim it as treasure found on his land. And if the army finds out, they will arrest me for possession of stolen property. So what do we do?" "Something I've been planning for months," replied Esperanza with fire in her eyes. "We're going to use this to legally destroy Burton, but I need your help, Miguel, and we'll also need allies." They returned to the cabin. That night, Esperanza spread a map on the table and began to explain her plan. It was bold, risky, and required perfect timing. "Burton thinks I want this land for the cabin," she said. "He doesn't know about the treasure. His greed is his weakness. We're going to use it against him over the next 2 days." They worked on the preparations. Miguel rode to neighboring towns with Esperanza's letters, contacting specific people. Thomas and Mateo continued fortifying the cabin while also preparing an escape route in case it was necessary. On the third day, just as Burton had promised, they arrived, and Miguel saw them from the lookout Thomas had built in a tall pine tree. 20 men on horseback, including Marshal Kopp, and 6 soldiers from the fort. Lowell Burton rode at the front with Kyle at his side. "They're coming!" Miguel exclaimed, rushing down quickly. Esperanza checked her rifle one last time. "Keep the strategy in mind. Don't open fire unless they do first. This must be resolved through the law, not with gunfire." The riders stopped about 46 meters from the cabin. Marshal Kopp dismounted and held out a paper. "Esperanza Cordero," he shouted. "In the name of the territorial government of Arizona, I demand that you vacate this property immediately. Mr. Clarence Barton has filed a valid legal claim on this land. You have 10 minutes to gather your belongings and leave." Esperanza stepped onto the porch with the rifle in her hand, but pointing it at the ground. Miguel, Thomas, and Mateo remained at the entrance, likewise armed. "Mr. Marshal Kopp, Esperanza replied in a clear voice that could be heard everywhere. This land was legally registered by my father, Lorenzo Vega, in the year 1867. I have the original deed registered in the territorial office before Burton arrived in Arizona. Those old documents were nullified, Burton grumbled. This land was reclassified as territorial property available for acquisition, and I bought it legally. Through what legal process? Esperanza inquired. There was public notice, a hearing, and an opportunity for the heirs to present their claim. Barton reddened. I don't have to explain the law to you, woman. Maybe not, Esperanza replied calmly, but perhaps you should explain it to him. She pointed toward the hillside, and all the riders turned around. Another group was approaching up the trail. 3 riders, one carrying the United States flag. As they drew nearer, Miguel recognized the leader. It was federal judge Harrison Webb from Santa Fe, a man famous for his unwavering integrity and his rejection of territorial corruption. The others were his secretary and a federal marshal. Burton turned pale. What brings you here, Your Honor? Judge Webb dismounted with all the dignity of his 60 years. I have received a formal request from Mrs. Cordero asking for a federal review of several land claims in this district. A request that contained evidence disturbing enough to justify my personal trip. Evidence? Burton let out a forced laugh. What evidence could an ignorant widow have? Why don't you come in, Your Honor? Esperanza proposed. I have documents that I think you will find very interesting. Judge Webb entered the cabin, accompanied by his secretary. Burton tried to follow them, but Webb raised his hand. This is a preliminary review, Mr. Barton. I will wait outside until I summon you. Esperanza spread several documents on the table. Miguel watched in surprise as his mother, whom Burton had called an ignorant widow, presented a meticulously prepared legal case. Here is my father's original deed. For this land, recorded on the 3rd of March, 1867, she began, showing a yellowish but still legible document. The legal description is clear. Approximately 80.9 hectares comprising this plot, bounded by these natural landmarks. The judge's secretary was taking notes quickly. Esperanza continued by showing another document. Burton's claim on the same land dates back to 1888. Note that the legal description is exactly the same. It's impossible for it to be a coincidence. How did you manage to access Barton's files? Webb inquired with interest. A friend employed at the land office provided me with the copies, Esperanza confessed. Guadalupe Reyes is in charge of the nightly cleaning of those offices. The judge gave his approval. The irregular nature did not detract from the validity of the evidence. However, there is additional information, Esperanza stated, as she pulled out a third document. It is a letter from Clarence Burton addressed to a territorial official dated 1887. I found it among discarded papers that Guadalupe recovered from the trash. Webb examined the letter, gradually raising his eyebrows. It seems to suggest a pact to intentionally reclassify some lands as available in exchange for a share of future mining profits. Precisely, affirmed Esperanza. Burton located high-value lands, bribed officials to fraudulently alter their classification. He subsequently acquired them at the lowest price. My property was not the only one affected. I compiled a list. She unfolded a document with 23 names. All those families suffered the loss of their lands under similar conditions between the years 1883 and 1890. Most were Mexicans, indigenous people, or widows lacking political influence. Burton deliberately selected them because he knew they could not litigate. Judge Webb examined the list with a grave expression. This is extremely serious. You can verify these cases. I have incomplete documentation for 14 cases. The affected families agree to testify as long as they are ensured protection against possible reprisals. Miguel felt a pride that swelled in his chest. His mother had not only survived in the mountains, but had built a federal case against the man who ruined her. There is a problem, Judge Webb said slowly. The evidence of a historical conspiracy is valuable, but we would need more tangible elements to void titles already transferred. Several years of legitimate possession generate rights, even if the initial acquisition was fraudulent. Esperanza smiled slightly. And what about evidence of an ongoing federal crime? She pulled out another document. It was a recent letter dated only 2 weeks earlier. The secretary read it aloud. Mr. Burton confirmed that geological analysis reveals massive deposits of high-quality copper in the East Corner district, with an estimated value exceeding $1 million. However, the constant obstruction by the occupant, Cordero, delays operations. I propose a definitive solution through forced eviction. Justified under the pretext of public safety, I attach the budget for the operation, which includes compensation for Territorial Marshal Kopp for his assistance. Inside the cabin, total silence reigned. Judge Webb slowly lifted his gaze. How did you get this? From Burton's office, Esperanza confessed. Thomas possesses skills acquired in his youth. He can enter and exit buildings without being detected. From the doorway, Tomas listened without feeling shame. He took the document to protect the woman who had helped him. That evidence was obtained illegally, Webb stated, his tone not showing much anger. It's a copy, Esperanza replied. The original remains in Burton's office. A proper search would find it. Judge Webb looked at Esperanza with evident respect. Mrs. Cordero, you are admirable. I'm a mother protecting her children, Esperanza replied simply. Webb stood up. Well, we'll confront Mr. Barton with these accusations. They went out to the porch. Barton was waiting with noticeable impatience. Marshal Kopp looked uncomfortable, perhaps sensing that something was wrong. Mr. Barton, Judge Webb said seriously, I have examined the evidence provided by Mrs. Cordero, which points to serious irregularities in your land purchases. Furthermore, I have seen a very disturbing document that suggests a conspiracy to carry out forced evictions under false legal pretexts with bribery of a federal official. Barton let out a nervous laugh. Absurd. What document? Webb described the contents of the letter without detailing how Esperanza had obtained it. Burton grew paler and paler. Kyle, less composed than his father, exclaimed, That witch must have stolen it from our files? So you admit the document exists? Webb asked calmly. Barton glared at his son. I admit nothing. Any stolen document is inadmissible. Then you won't mind if my sheriff gets a warrant to inspect your offices and retrieve the original, said Webb. If it doesn't exist, no problem. If it does, it will be evidence in your federal trial for conspiracy, real estate fraud, and bribery of an official. Barton's face went from anger to fear and back to anger. You have no jurisdiction here. This is a territorial matter. Fraud that crosses territorial boundaries involves federal lands and includes bribery of federal marshals is entirely under my authority, Webb replied firmly. Marshal Kopp is suspended from his duties effective immediately, and someone will assume federal authority in this district until a replacement arrives. Kopp, caught between two sides, chose the safer option and raised his hands. I know nothing about bribes, Your Honor. Barton hired me to evict illegal occupants. That's all. We'll see what your bank records say, Webb said dryly. Burton looked around desperately, seeking support, but his men, sensing which way the wind was blowing, began to ride away. Kyle tried to protest, but his father silenced him. This isn't over, Barton threatened. I have lawyers. I have contacts in Washington. And I have evidence, Esperanza replied from the porch in a clear voice. I have the testimonies of 23 families that you ruined. I have documents that prove your corruption, and now I have a federal judge who listens to me. Burton looked at her with absolute hatred. I should have destroyed you completely when I had the chance. Esperanza said, You tried, but you failed. Judge Webb ordered his bailiff to escort Burton back to Tucson. The fort's soldiers, lacking clear instructions and not wanting to get involved in a federal scandal, withdrew. In less than 60 minutes, the mountain fell silent again. Webb stayed to talk with Esperanza. "You've started something very important here, Mrs. Cordero, but I must warn you, Barton will fight using all his resources. The litigation will be lengthy, perhaps lasting years. Are you prepared for that?" Esperanza replied, "I've been preparing for 6 years. Since the day I lost my ranch, I've studied law from the books Guadalupe lent me. I've recorded every unjust act. I've forged alliances with all the families affected by Burton. I am ready." Webb smiled, showing his approval. "You'll need legal counsel. I know lawyers in Santa Fe who offer pro bono services for social justice causes. I'll get in touch with them. Thank you, Your Honor." After Webb's departure, the family celebrated simply with coffee and sweet bread that Guadalupe had sent. Miguel looked at his mother with renewed admiration. She was no longer the fragile woman he remembered, as grief and injustice had hardened her like steel. That night, Miguel went out to the porch where Esperanza was gazing at the stars. "Mother," he said softly, "when were you planning to tell me about the silver?" Esperanza turned in surprise. "Did Thomas tell you?" "He showed it to me and said I had to know that it was dangerous to remain ignorant." Esperanza nodded. "He's right. The silver is the real reason Burton wants these lands. He doesn't know for sure, but he suspects it. Your grandfather wasn't as cautious as he thought. Old rumors circulate about a hidden military treasure. What do you plan to do with it?" Esperanza sighed. "If we win the lawsuit against Burton, I will recover my ranch and this land. Then I will discreetly contact the federal army, not the corrupt territorial officials. I will return the silver along with a detailed explanation of why my father hid it. We'll let them decide if there's a legal reward for its recovery. And if there isn't, then I will have acted rightly," Esperanza asserted firmly. "I will not build a new life on stolen wealth, no matter how noble my father's intention was in hiding it." Miguel hugged his mother. "You are the strongest woman I know." "I wasn't born strong," said Esperanza. "Pain made me strong, and injustice turned me into a fighter. And those 3 young men," he pointed inside, where Tomas and Mateo were setting up cots to sleep, "gave me reasons to continue when I was thinking of giving up." They remained silent under the starry sky, listening to the wind blowing through the pines. The judicial process was just beginning. However, after a long time, Esperanza was experiencing genuine hope. In the following weeks, rapid changes occurred. The federal sheriff of Webb arrested Marshall Kopp upon discovering suspicious bank deposits that coincided with the dates of irregular actions. Barton paid expensive lawyers from San Francisco. However, the documentary evidence gathered by Esperanza was devastating. The real difficulty was much more delicate. Barton had no possibility of fighting publicly without revealing his corruption. So he changed his strategy and launched an offensive of gossip and community coercion. Miguel found out while going on horseback to Tucson to buy provisions at Guadalupe's store. The woman seemed uneasy. "Burton is spreading rumors about your mother," she murmured. "He claims she is insane, that she refuses to obey the correct court rulings. He also says she risks the safety of innocent minors, raising them in the mountains like animals." "Tomas and Mateo are safer with her than abandoned on the street," Miguel objected. "I understand, but Burton has distorted reality. He claims that Esperanza kidnapped a boy. An Apache from the reservation is hiding a minor offender. He has exerted pressure on the reservation residents and on the county sheriff to open an investigation." Miguel felt burning inside. Burton, unable to win through legal means, sought to ruin Esperanza's reputation. To make matters worse, Guadalupe reported that certain families of Mexican origin who had committed to testify against Burton were recanting their promise. Burton had found ways to coerce them: threats of eviction, loan denial, and job dismissal. Miguel returned to the hut carrying the bad news, and Esperanza listened with a grave face. It was something foreseeable, she commented. Burton has influence. The population is frightened. What measures do we take? Asked Mateo, who had been listening to the conversation. We need support from people whom Burton cannot intimidate, said Esperanza, and I think I know where to find them. 3 days later, Miguel rode south with Thomas, following Esperanza's instructions. They were heading to a tiny village named Tubac, near the border with Mexico. There they found Josefina Morales, a woman about 40 years old who managed a cooperative made up of Mexican families who had lost their lands to various Anglo landowners. Esperanza wrote me a letter, commented Josefina after receiving them. Her lawsuit against Burton could pave the way for all of us. If she triumphs, it sets a legal precedent. Will you give us your help? Asked Miguel. I have here 20 families who were dispossessed of their lands through a similar fraud. They are all going to testify. Burton does not have the capacity to intimidate all of us at once. In addition, they approached the Apache reservation of San Carlos, but with greater caution. Thomas had escaped from that place years before and, in theory, was a deserter. However, there was a man Thomas trusted, an old man named Naish, a distant relative of Geronimo. Naish heard Thomas's story in the Apache language, which Miguel did not understand. At the end, the old man expressed himself in broken Spanish. Many children from our community disappear. They are taken to educational centers where they are beaten for speaking Apache and are exploited as cheap labor. If a Mexican woman managed to rescue one of our own, we owe her a debt, and I will contact the agent. I will inform him that Thomas is in good condition, and I will find more people to testify about the atrocities committed by Barton against our people. The journey lasted 14 days. When Miguel and Thomas returned to the house, they noticed that Esperanza had obtained encouraging news. The lawyer suggested by Judge Webb had agreed to defend her free of charge. His name was Samuel Green, a young man full of ideals from Boston who had moved west with the purpose of fighting injustice. Green arrived at the hut towards the end of October, thin-billed, wore glasses, and was around 30 years old, but his gaze sparkled with the fervor of a crusader. Mrs. Cordero, he said after examining all the papers, your legal situation is exceptional. Not only can you recover your property, but also completely dismantle Burton's control. However, I must warn you, he will resort to unfair tactics. It has already begun, commented Esperanza as she recounted the spreading of gossip, and Green nodded in agreement. It was to be expected, but I bring news. Judge Webb has set official sessions for January in Tucson, public and with media attendance. Burton has no way to prevent it. That night, during dinner, Thomas asked a question that was on everyone's mind. Mrs. Esperanza, what will happen if we are defeated? What will become of Mateo and me? Esperanza took the hands of the two young men. We are not going to lose, but in case the unimaginable happens, the three of you will leave with me. We will head to Mexico, if necessary. I will not allow anyone to take you away from my side. Mateo, who almost never showed emotions, had his eyes filled with tears. No one had ever fought for me until now. Well, right now there is someone who is, Esperanza replied with determination. The month of November brought the first serious complication. Kyle Burton, apparently without his father's knowledge, led a nighttime raid on the house. 6 individuals tried to set it on fire, throwing burning torches onto the roof. However, Thomas, who slept lightly like a wild beast, heard the sound of approaching horses and alerted the others. By the time the torches flew through the air, they were already prepared. Miguel and Esperanza fired shots into the sky while Thomas and Mateo smothered the fire using blankets and buckets of water drawn from the well. The attackers fled, but one of them, drunk, fell off his horse. They managed to catch him. He was a worker from Burton's ranch, recruited by Kyle under the promise of $10. The federal marshal, at that moment a man named Porter, whom Webb had brought from Santa Fe, proceeded to arrest the laborer. During the interrogation, he recounted how Kyle Burton had orchestrated the attack. Porter mounted his horse and rode straight to Burton's ranch and arrested Kyle. Clarence Burton, furious, paid a hefty bail. Kyle was released, but the damage to Burton's reputation was considerable. The Tucson media, especially a novice reporter named Daniel Pierce from the Tucson Citizen, wrote incisive articles about the violent strategies of local elites against unprotected widows. Defenseless Esperanza laughed as she read the note. It's clear that Mr. Pierce doesn't know who I am, but the article turned out to be beneficial. The collective perception began to shift, and Mexican-American families felt represented by Esperanza. Even several Anglo-Saxons began to doubt Burton, especially those who did not benefit from his influence. In December, snow covered the mountains. The hut was freezing. However, Miguel, Thomas, and Mateo had cut plenty of firewood and huddled around the fire each night. While Green finalized the legal strategy and Esperanza rehearsed her statement. "You must come across as impeccable in court," I warned Green. "Burton's lawyers will try to portray you as hysterical, irrational, a woman guided by emotions, incapable of understanding complex legal issues." "Let them try," Esperanza replied, with a firm look on Christmas Eve. Guadalupe climbed up to the mountain, carrying simple gifts. Candies for the children, a new scarf for Esperanza, tobacco for Miguel. However, she also brought unsettling news. "Burton promised to cover a full year's rent if I testified against Esperanza," she confessed. "I refused, but others accepted. He has bribed 3 witnesses who will claim that Esperanza made threats of violence and suffers from mental instability." "Bought witnesses can be refuted," Green commented, although he seemed uneasy. "And there's something else," Guadalupe continued. "Burton has brought a doctor from San Francisco, an expert on women's mental disorders. He will testify that Esperanza's behavior shows severe hysteria, requiring her to be institutionalized." Miguel exploded. "That's nonsense. My mother is the most sensible woman I know." "In courts controlled by men," Green stated sadly, "a doctor's testimony against a woman carries dangerous influence." Esperanza remained calm. "Let them come. I have my own witnesses." The morning of the 1st of January, 1892, dawned clear and freezing. Green arrived on horseback at the cabin with the final news. The oral hearings would begin on January 15. The hearings would last 3 days, presided over by Judge Webb. However, Barton had managed to add 2 territorial magistrates, a panel of 3 magistrates with 2 against 1. "It's not ideal," Green admitted, "but Webb is the most senior. His opinion carries more weight." The following 2 weeks were spent in exhaustive preparation. That preparation was meticulous. Esperanza memorized every date, every document, and every detail of her case. Miguel, Thomas, and Mateo also prepared to testify about life with Esperanza. Thus, they would prove that she was a capable mother, not a demented kidnapper. On the eve of their departure to Tucson, Esperanza gathered her 3 children. "Tomorrow, the real battle begins," she announced. "It won't be easy. Barton will say terrible things about me and about you. The lawyers will try to confuse and intimidate you. But don't forget, the truth is our weapon, and the truth is that we are a family. No one can take that from us." Thomas, Mateo, and Miguel nodded seriously. "Whatever happens," Esperanza continued, "I am proud of all of you. Thomas, you showed me that strength comes in unexpected ways. Mateo, you taught me that kindness can blossom even in a heart wounded by evil. Miguel, You reminded me that forgiveness is possible and that family love endures beyond any distance." The four of them melted into an embrace, bound by a bond stronger than blood, a love forged in adversity, a family chosen rather than inherited. The next day, at dawn, they rode toward Tucson in search of justice, heading toward their destiny. The territorial courthouse of Tucson was a 2-story adobe building with reddish tile roofs. That morning of January 15, when Esperanza arrived with her family, a crowd was already gathering outside. The press had turned the case into a scandal. "Widow takes on the Burton empire," one newspaper headlined. "Legal battle for the soul of Arizona," another exclaimed. Daniel Pierce, a reporter for the Tucson Citizen, approached immediately. "Mrs. Cordero, you look nervous." "I'm ready," Esperanza replied simply. They entered the courtroom, packed with people. All 100 seats for the public were taken. On one side, she recognized familiar faces. Guadalupe Josefina Morales, accompanied by the delegation from Tubac, Mexican families harmed by Burton, and several Apache employees, including Naish. On the other side, the Anglo-Saxon elite of Tucson, merchants, landowners, and Burton's associates. Burton sat at the defense table with 3 lawyers of refined and expensive appearance. Kyle, standing behind him, stared at Esperanza with a look full of hatred. The former marshal cop, now reduced to defendant, remained in the gallery with a dejected appearance. The 3 magistrates entered. Judge Webb in the center, escorted by territorial judges Harrison and Blake. Harrison had a reputation for leaning toward commercial interests. Blake, a politician with gubernatorial aspirations, was known for his malleability. "Order," Webb exclaimed, banging his gavel. The murmur died down. "These proceedings will address the charges of real estate fraud and criminal conspiracy filed by Esperanza Cordero against Clarence Burton and his accomplices. Mr. Green, you may begin with your case." Samuel Green stood up with surprising confidence for someone so young. "Your Honor, gentlemen of the court, this case is simple at its core. Mr. Burton used his corrupt influence to systematically dispossess entire families. He left the weakest without land. Mrs. Cordero was a victim, but she refused to be silenced. The evidence would reveal that he spoke for 20 minutes, presenting the case methodically. Burton's lawyers raised objections incessantly, but Webb overruled them most of the time. The first to testify was Esperanza herself. Green led her through her story, her husband's death, the debts incurred, the foreclosure, and her life in the mountains. She spoke with a clear voice, free of drama, letting the facts speak for themselves. "Mrs. Cordero," Green asked, "why do you assume that Mr. Burton wants your land in the Rincon Mountains because of mineral deposits?" Esperanza replied, "He possesses geological reports about copper and perhaps silver, and my lands are essential to access those deposits." Green displayed the geological report that Thomas. Burton's lawyers raised objections. "Stolen document, inadmissible. It's a copy," Green replied calmly. "The original can be obtained by legally subpoenaing Mr. Burton." Webb admitted the document as provisional evidence. Burton, furious, whispered with his lawyers. Next came the cross-examination. Burton's lead attorney, a man named Whitmore, approached Esperanza with a predatory smile. "Mrs. Cordero, you lost your ranch due to legitimate debts, correct?" "I lost my ranch because your client fraudulently increased my husband's debts." "And he bribed the judge," Esperanza answered firmly. "That is a serious accusation without proof." "Do you have direct proof of the bribery?" "I have documents showing payments from Mr. Burton to Judge Houghton with dates immediately following the foreclosure hearing." Whitmore was stunned and blinked. Green gave a slight smile. They had new evidence reserved for cross-examination. Whitmore proposed changing the subject immediately. "Do you admit that you took in an Apache child from the reservation and a known thief. Isn't that so? Esperanza corrected. I rescued 2 innocent minors from violence and death. Thomas was fleeing a massacre. Mateo had suffered a brutal beating. Any decent person would have done the same. Decent person? Is it decent for a solitary woman living in the mountains with 3 young men? The audience whispered, and Green interjected, Objection. The prosecutor is suggesting misconduct without foundation. Sustained, Webb stated firmly. Mr. Whitmore, keep your insinuations out of this courtroom. Whitmore changed strategy. Mrs. Cordero, isn't it true that you threatened Mr. Burton's employees with firearms? I defended my home from violent assailants. Mr. Burton sent men to burn me alive, and one of them is already in custody for that crime. Whitmore kept pressing, but Esperanza did not give in. She answered each question with serenity, based on facts without overflowing emotions. Miguel noticed how frustration grew on the lawyer's face. Finally, Whitmore played his trump card. Mrs. Cordero, isn't it true that you suffer from episodes of mental instability, hallucinations, and persecutory delusions? No. Then how do you justify claiming that my client, a respectable businessman, runs an extensive conspiracy against you? Because I have documentary evidence, Esperanza replied dryly. There's no delusion when there is written evidence. The audience laughed, and even Judge Webb cracked a smile. Whitmore ended up surrendering. After 4 hours of testimony, Esperanza left the stand without having wavered an inch. The next day, witnesses appeared in her favor. Guadalupe testified about the documents she found among the trash at the territorial offices. Josefina Morales recounted similar fraudulent schemes in Tubac. Naish, through an interpreter, testified about the massacre of Thomas's family and the involvement of treasure hunters funded by Burton. Daniel Pierce was taking notes frantically, aware that he had content for weeks of articles. However, Burton counterattacked. His first witness was Dr. Edmund Chase, an expert in female mental disorders whom Guadalupe had already mentioned. Chase commanded respect. 50 years old, impeccably dressed, degrees from prestigious Eastern faculties. He testified in an authoritative tone. I have analyzed Mrs. Cordero's documented behavior. Her insistence on living alone in rudimentary conditions, her refusal to comply with reasonable court orders, and her tendency to perceive plots where there is only ordinary legal procedure. Everything points to severe female hysteria with paranoid delusions. Do you recommend any treatment? Whitmore inquired. Immediate commitment to an appropriate psychiatric institution, Chase declared seriously, before she becomes a threat to herself or the minors under her care, the audience murmured, and Miguel saw fear in Mateo's eyes. Esperanza clenched her hands, maintaining a calm demeanor. Green stood up to cross-examine Dr. Chase. Have you personally examined Mrs. Cordero? I don't need a direct examination. The behavioral pattern is clear from a diagnostic standpoint. I understand. And how many diagnoses of female hysteria have you made in your entire professional career? Hundreds. How many of them had filed legal complaints against influential men before receiving that diagnosis? Chase hesitated. I don't see why that matters. I do, replied Green. It is not appropriate for women who question male power to be suddenly labeled as crazy. Objection, roared Whitmore. I withdraw the question, said Green with a faint smile. The seed of doubt had already been planted. Burton used his last resort that day. 3 paid witnesses who testified under oath that Esperanza had made violent threats, exhibited unstable behavior, and appeared dangerous. Green dismantled their testimonies during cross-examination, showing that Burton had recently paid off their debts or given them jobs. By the end of the second day, the trial seemed evenly matched. Burton had power and influence, but Esperanza had evidence and the truth. Everything would be decided in the third session, and that night in the humble hotel room Green had paid for the family, Esperanza gathered everyone together. Tomorrow, the three of you will testify, she told Miguel, Thomas, and Mateo. Burton's lawyers will try to portray you as incompetent or dishonest. Miguel, they will say you abandoned your mother and have no authority to speak. Tomas, they will present you as a threatening brute, and Mateo as an incorrigible criminal. And what do we do? Mateo asked softly. Tell the truth, Esperanza replied. Tell them what our life is really like. Let the court see that we are a real family, not the caricature Burton is painting. The third day arrived. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense. Miguel was the first to be called, and Whitmore charged at him without delay. Mr. Cordero, you abandoned your mother for 9 years. Why should we think you care now? Miguel had rehearsed for this moment. I made a terrible mistake, but when I returned, my mother forgave me. She showed me that family isn't about perfection, but about love and second chances. She extended that same mercy to Thomas and Mateo. Thomas testified how Esperanza rescued him, healed him, and gave him shelter when he was lonely and terrified. He spoke in a calm but clear Spanish, with a dignity that captivated even the hostile spectators. Doña Esperanza didn't see an Apache. He said she saw a bloodied boy. She didn't treat me like a savage. She treated me like a son. Mateo, initially uneasy, found courage as he spoke, recounting his years on the street, constant hunger, beatings, humiliation. Mrs. Esperanza gave me much more than food, he said, his voice trembling. She gave me respect, taught me to read and write, made me believe I could be more than a thief, and no one else had ever trusted me. When he finished, many in the room had tears in their eyes. Even Judge Harrison was visibly moved. Whitmore made one final attack. It's not true that Mrs. Cordero manipulates them. She uses their pitiful stories to provoke sympathy. The three answered in unison, no. That was when Green played her last card. He called an unexpected witness, an elegantly dressed elderly man whom no one initially identified. When his name was mentioned, the room filled with murmurs. Colonel James Richardson, former U.S. Army soldier. At 70 years old, he maintained an upright posture and wore medals on his uniform jacket. He took the stand with the authority of someone who had led troops in combat. Colonel, Green began, what was your position in 1873? Commander of Fort Lowell, tasked with protecting all military convoys in the Arizona Territory. Do you recall an incident in October 1873 involving a silver shipment? Yes. A caravan was attacked near the Rincon Mountains. 5 soldiers died, and $40,000 in silver was stolen. It was never recovered. I knew a scout named Lorenzo Vega very well. Vega led that caravan, reported the attack, and stated that the bandits seized the silver. My investigation showed that the officers in charge of the convoy were in collusion with the attackers. They were arrested, prosecuted, and sent to prison, but the silver never appeared. We assumed the attackers had hidden it. Green addressed the court and declared, Your Honor, I wish to present new evidence. Mrs. Cordero has located that missing silver. The public reacted with uproar. Webb banged his gavel several times and shouted, Order! Order! Barton stood up, his face reddened, and exclaimed, This is ridiculous. What relevance does silver stolen 20 years ago have to this trial? Everything, Green replied calmly. This explains why Mr. Burton so eagerly desires Mrs. Cordero's property. It is not just about copper, but about rumors of a hidden treasure. Webb leaned forward and commented, Mr. Green, this is an unusual accusation. With exceptional evidence, Your Honor, Mrs. Cordero is willing to show where the silver is and return it to the federal government. However, she first needs assurance that her land will be safe. Colonel Richardson interrupted. If the silver is recovered in good condition, the federal government should certainly grant a substantial reward for its discovery. Furthermore, the land where it was found should be designated as a federal historic site, protected from land disputes. Miguel understood the cleverness of Green's strategy. If Esperanza returned the silver, she would become a heroine instead of a squatter without legal title. The federal designation would permanently preserve the land against Burton's claims. Whitmore wanted to object, but Webb silenced him. This is a matter of direct federal interest. We will proceed. Green called Esperanza back to the stand. Mrs. Cordero, where is the silver? In a cave on my property, she replied. My father hid it after the attack, intending to return it when the corrupt officers were arrested. However, he died before achieving it. He passed the secret on to me. Why didn't you report it earlier? Out of fear. If Barton learned of the silver, he would use his power to take it from me along with my land. So I first had to consolidate my legal right to the property. Are you willing to disclose the location now? Yes, with conditions. First, that my property title to the land is legally confirmed. Second, that the land be designated as a federally protected area. Third, that any compensation from the recovery be used to compensate all the families that Burton swindled. The room burst into applause. Webb did not interrupt him immediately. Esperanza's action was politically astute and morally irreproachable. Burton stood up, trembling with fury. It's a trick. The silver doesn't exist. It's a desperate invention. Richardson turned to Burton. How can you be so sure, Mr. Burton, unless you already knew of its existence? And if you were looking for it, Burton turned pale and fell into the trap. Webb called a recess. The three judges deliberated in private for 2 hours. The people waited with growing tension. Miguel held the hands of Thomas and Mateo while Esperanza prayed in silence. Finally, the judges returned, and Webb spoke. This court has reached a unanimous decision. The irregularities in Mr. Burton's land purchases are serious enough to warrant a full federal criminal investigation. We suspend all his property deeds until the investigation is complete. Burton shouted in protest, but Webb continued. Specifically, regarding the Cordero land, we consider that Lorenzo Vega's original title is valid and was never legally annulled. The foreclosure of the Cordero Ranch is canceled based on evidence of fraudulent figures. Both properties are restored to Mrs. Esperanza Cordero, effective immediately. Esperanza closed her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks. Miguel hugged her tightly, while Thomas and Mateo shouted with joy. Furthermore, Webb continued, we recommend that the federal government declare the Cordero land in the Rincon Mountains a protected historical site, subject to verification of the reported silver. Mrs. Cordero will have 30 days to reveal its location under federal supervision. This is an injustice, Burton roared. I will appeal to every court all the way to Washington. That is your right, Webb replied coldly. But in the meantime, you are under criminal investigation. Federal Marshal, make sure Mr. Burton does not leave the territory. Whitmore and his associates surrounded Burton, whispering urgently. Kyle Burton tried to slip away, but Marshal Porter stopped him. Outside the courthouse, people cheered for Esperanza. Daniel Pierce peppered her with questions, while Mexican families hugged her, crying with gratitude. Josefina Morales raised Esperanza's hand in triumph. You did it, the crowd shouted. You defeated Burton. However, Esperanza was aware that the victory was not total. Burton would appeal, resort to legal tricks, and use all his influence. The conflict would last months, perhaps years. That night, as they dined modestly in the hotel dining room, Green toasted with water. Mrs. Cordero, you have achieved something extraordinary. Regardless of what happens next, you have changed the rules of the game. Now, other victims of Barton hold hope. The work is just beginning, said Esperanza. Land recovery is just the beginning. We need genuine changes in land allocation and in the protection of widows and families in vulnerable situations. Structural transformations take time. Green warned, I have time. And Esperanza replied, now I also have a voice. The following days attracted an avalanche of interest. Newspapers from across the region spread the story. Some portrayed Esperanza as a heroine, others as a dangerous agitator challenging the established social order. She didn't care. She had already spoken her truth. After a week, under the supervision of Colonel Richardson and Judge Webb, Esperanza led a federal expedition to the cave. The soldiers removed the 16 boxes of silver, meticulously recording each ingot. The total value, adjusted for appreciation, amounted to $62,000. Richardson, admiring Esperanza's honesty, suggested a 25% reward, $15,500, a considerable sum. Esperanza kept her word. She hired Green to manage a compensation fund for Burton's victims. Every family victim of fraudulent land dispossession would receive a payment allowing them to reacquire property or restart their lives. Additionally, she allocated funds to create a small school on her recovered ranch where Mexican and Apache children could study without suffering discrimination. Thomas was to be the teacher's assistant, and Mateo would help with administration. Meanwhile, Burton faced a catastrophe. The federal investigation revealed 20 years of scams. More than 40 families filed lawsuits. His political partners abandoned him to avoid being implicated. The bank closed after a federal audit. In March, Burton made a final desperate attempt, trying to escape to Mexico with hidden money, but Sheriff Porter arrested him at the border. He was tried, found guilty of several federal crimes, and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Kyle Burton, involved in the arson, received a 5-year sentence. Marshall Kopp was sentenced to 3 years for bribery and corruption. The spring of 1892 changed Rancho Cordero. Where desolation once reigned, life now flourished. Miguel restored the buildings with the help of local workers. Thomas planted gardens using Apache knowledge of desert flora. Mateo set up a modest library with donated volumes and taught himself accounting to manage the ranch's accounts. Every dawn, Esperanza stood on the porch, contemplating the land that finally legally belonged to her. The desert sun illuminated the revitalized fields, the corral where new horses grazed, and the one-room schoolhouse they were building. "What are you thinking about, Mother?" asked Miguel, approaching her. "Your father, Esperanza," replied softly. "I wish he could see this, see that you didn't die in vain, that I safeguarded what we built together. He would be proud of the person I have become," Esperanza expressed. "When he died, I was a submissive woman, afraid to make decisions. Life forced me to become strong. Suffering taught me resilience. Injustice revealed how crucial it is to fight." The school opened its doors in April with 12 students on the first day. Mexican children, some Apaches from the reservation whose parents placed their trust in Esperanza. Even 2 Anglo children attended because their parents valued her courage. Thomas taught tracking skills and natural knowledge. Mateo helped with reading and writing, and a traveling teacher hired by Esperanza taught arithmetic and penmanship. Guadalupe came regularly, bringing provisions and news from Tucson, and remarked, "You are famous. Women talk about you. They say that if Esperanza Cordero managed to defeat Burton, maybe they too can fight their own battles." And indeed, they did fight. Esperanza became a figure admired by all. Widows and marginalized women sought her advice. Although she couldn't attend to all, she gave them attention, guidance, and connected them with lawyers like Green. "You have started a movement," Green stated during his visit in May. "There is currently an organized initiative to modify property laws, protect widows, and limit the influence of banks and landowners. In time, it will happen. Fundamental transformations require several generations, but you planted the seeds." In June, an official letter arrived from the federal government. The Cordero land in the Rincon Mountains became the Vega Historical Site with permanent protection. No one would be allowed to exploit it, extract minerals, or claim it. Esperanza could live there, but the property would remain in the hands of the American people in perpetuity. Excellent. commented Esperanza upon reading the document. My father loved that land. Now it will be preserved for future generations. In July, Thomas's wedding took place. At 18, he married an Apache girl from the reservation in a ceremony that blended indigenous and Catholic customs. Esperanza shed tears of joy witnessing her adopted son find love and start his own family. Mateo, 16, mentioned his plans to study law. I want to become a lawyer like Mr. Green, he stated, to help those who lack representation. You will achieve it, Esperanza assured him. You have intelligence and, most importantly, a heart that perceives injustice. Miguel kept himself balanced thanks to the responsibilities of the ranch. He found a purpose he never experienced in California. He worked alongside his mother, gaining knowledge not only about property management but also about ethical leadership. One August afternoon, Daniel Pierce showed up to write an update article. He had covered the story faithfully. His articles helped change public perception. Doña Cordero asked, "When you lost everything while living alone in the mountains, did you ever hesitate? Did you consider giving up?" Esperanza reflected on the question. She acknowledged that there were nights when the cold chilled to the bone, hunger caused pain, and loneliness pressed down like a stone. Uncertainty about my survival, but I never doubted the need to fight. What drove you to continue? At first, simple stubbornness. I refused to let Burton triumph completely. Later, with Thomas's arrival, I found a reason to live beyond myself. Mateo gave me another reason. Miguel reminded me that family can be restored, and together we encouraged each other. What message would you give to other women facing similar injustice? Esperanza fixed her gaze on Pierce, aware that her words would be printed and spread throughout the region. I would tell them that the system is designed to make us lose. Influential men dominate the laws, the courts, and the capital. They expect us to accept defeat, to surrender in silence. Don't do it. Every time a woman fights, even if she loses, she paves the way for the next one to win. When we triumph, we transform the rules for the benefit of all. And if they feel fear, it must be remembered that fear is inherent. I experienced constant fear of death, of failure, of disappointing my children, yet I acted despite that fear. Courage does not mean absence of fear. Courage is doing what is right, even if your hands tremble. Pierce hastily wrote a final question. What is the next step for Esperanza Cordero? Esperanza offered a smile. I will continue my work. The school will expand. I will support more families in recovering their lands. I will fight for changes in the laws. And I will raise my sons to be men who understand that justice does not come by itself. You have to fight for it generation after generation. Pierce's article appeared in September and was reprinted by newspapers from Colorado to California. Esperanza received 100 letters from women recounting their experiences, seeking guidance, and thanking her for the inspiration. In October, it was 1 year since Miguel's return. The family celebrated simply but with intense happiness. They gathered around the table, that place where so many resolutions had been made and so many plans had been devised. 12 months ago, Miguel commented, I returned hoping to find my mother broken, but I encountered the strongest woman I have ever seen. I wasn't born strong, Esperanza recalled. Life shaped me. Pain acted as a hammer, injustice as an anvil, and I was struck until I turned into steel. Mom Mateo asked timidly, when I become a lawyer, what kind of cases should I take? The most complicated ones, Esperanza replied calmly. Those where the clients are poor, marginalized, and hopeless people. That is where justice is most indispensable. The wealthy always get lawyers, while the dispossessed need defenders. Tomas gave his approval. In my village, we say that the most worthy warrior is not the one who wins the most battles, but the one who protects the vulnerable. That is true wisdom, Esperanza noted. November brought a surprise. Burton died in prison from a heart attack. Kyle, who got parole for good behavior, left Arizona entirely and headed to San Francisco, a place where his name was unknown. Upon hearing the news, Esperanza felt an ambiguous emotion, not happiness at Burton's death, but relief that that episode had finally closed. "How are you?" asked Miguel Libre. Esperanza answered bluntly, "He no longer poses a threat. He no longer occupies space in my mind. I can move forward without looking back." In December, the first snow fell on the ranch. The school children played among the unusual snowflakes in the desert while Esperanza watched them from the window. Now there were 24 students learning together without distinction of race or origin. Christmas Eve gathered the extended family. Guadalupe, Josefina, along with the entourage from Tubac, Naish, and several Apache elders, and Green, who had come from Santa Fe. They shared dinner, exchanging stories and laughter. Green raised his glass and proposed a toast to Esperanza Cordero, who showed Arizona that justice is not an exclusive privilege of the powerful, but a right for everyone. Everyone raised their glasses. Esperanza, so moved she could barely speak, said, "You were my companions in the struggle. Without each of you, I would not have succeeded, and the victory does not belong only to me." Once everyone had left, Esperanza went out for a walk alone. The night was clear. The stars shone over the snow-covered desert that looked silver. She wrapped herself in her shawl and gazed at the mountains where the cabin still stood, preserved as a tribute to her journey. She had lost her husband, her home, her security. She had experienced extreme poverty, overwhelming loneliness, and a terror that immobilized her. However, rising from the ashes, she found something no one could take from her: the conviction that she could overcome any storm. The system was designed for women like her to fail. But by rejecting that defeat, she not only rescued herself, but transformed the norms for all who came after. Widows in Arizona now enjoyed rights they didn't have before. Laws had been changed and legal precedents set. The next Esperanza Cordero would face a less titanic struggle. "Your legacy is not limited to the recovered land," Green had told her, "but it is renewed hope for all the marginalized." Esperanza smiled under the snowy night. She was 48 years old and had entire decades ahead of her to live. Decades passed continuing the work, watching their children grow, and helping more families find justice. The past was painful. The present meant a victory achieved through effort, sacrifice, and suffering. The future was a promise they would build every day with every choice and every battle. Miguel went to the porch and said, "Mother, it's cold. You'd better come inside." Then Esperanza expressed, "I only feel gratitude." The reason? For everything. For the suffering that strengthened me and for the injustice that taught me to fight. Thanks to Thomas and Mateo, who gave me reasons to continue when I wanted to give up. Also for you, who returned and showed me that forgiveness has healing power.